The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence of Kandahar airfield like a blade through Kevlar. Senior Master Sergeant Kai Phoenix Nakamura pressed her headset closer to her ear, straining to catch fragments of what sounded like a death sentence transmitted in military brevity codes. Mayday, Mayday, this is Trident 6. Coordinates 34.2847 north, 69.1435 east. 12 souls, wounded bird, enemy armor converging. The transmission dissolved into white noise, leaving only the hum of generators and the distant rumble of B-52s returning from night missions. Phoenix stood in the operations center, her weathered flight suit bearing the faded patches of 3 combat deployments. Around her, junior officers shuffled papers and avoided eye contact. At 34, she was ancient by pilot standards, relegated to cargo runs while younger aviators claimed the glory missions. Her call sign had once meant something, earned during a night extraction in Helmand, where she'd landed a damaged C-130 in a sandstorm, saving 14 Marines from certain death. Now it felt like a relic, whispered with the kind of nostalgic reverence reserved for has-beens. Colonel Marcus Thorne emerged from the briefing room, his face carved from granite and frustration. Behind him trailed Captain Rodriguez and Major Kim, both shaking their heads in defeat. "It's a no-go," Thorne announced to the assembled air crews. "Trident 6 is pinned down in the Korangal Valley, 12 clicks from the nearest LZ. Intel shows 3 Taliban armored vehicles closing their position, with more inbound. The terrain's impossible vertical walls, no room for rotary wing, and every fixed-wing approach is a death trap." Phoenix felt her pulse quicken. She knew that valley, had studied its treacherous geography during countless mission briefings. The Korangal was where helicopters went to die, where even the most experienced pilots feared to venture. But something in the radio call nagged at her, a familiar voice, a particular cadence she'd heard before. "Sir," she interjected, stepping forward despite the sideways glances from her colleagues. That voice on the radio, was it Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb? Thorne's expression darkened. "How would you know that, Sergeant?" "Because Webb was on that Helmand extraction 3 years ago. He knows what I can do." Phoenix moved to the tactical display, her finger tracing the valley's contours. "And I think I know how to get him out." The operations center fell silent except for the soft whir of cooling fans and the distant thunder of war machines. In that moment, everything changed, though none of them realized it yet. The war was about to witness something unprecedented, something that would redefine what it meant to reach the unreachable. Phoenix stood at the map, calculating angles and impossibilities, while somewhere in the mountains, 12 SEALs counted down their final moments, unaware that hope flew on turboprop wings. The morning sun painted the Afghan mountains in shades of copper and shadow, but in the Korangal Valley, Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb could only see the metallic glint of death approaching. His team of Navy SEALs lay scattered among the rocky outcroppings, their defensive perimeter shrinking with each enemy volley. 3 of his men bore shrapnel wounds from the IED that had destroyed their convoy, and ammunition was running dangerously low. The Taliban fighters knew they had cornered America's elite, and they were savoring every moment of it. Webb pressed his radio close to his bloodied lips, transmitting on the emergency frequency one more time. Any station, this is Trident 6 requesting immediate extraction. We have wounded, ammunition-critical enemy closing from 3 sides." He paused, listening to static, then added with grim resignation, "If anyone's listening, we're about to become ghosts." 400 miles away, Phoenix stood before a room full of skeptical faces. The mission briefing had devolved into something resembling a medical intervention, with senior officers taking turns explaining why her plan violated every principle of aviation safety. The numbers were stark. The Korangal Valley's natural landing zone was less than 2,000 feet long, surrounded by peaks reaching 14,000 feet, with unpredictable wind shear that had claimed 3 aircraft in the past 2 years. "Sergeant Nakamura," Colonel Thorne said, his voice carrying the patience of a man addressing a particularly stubborn child. A C-130 Hercules requires a minimum of 3,000 feet for landing, preferably 5,000. What you're proposing isn't just dangerous, it's physically impossible. Phoenix had heard variations of this speech throughout her career. Too risky, too unconventional, too much of everything that made conventional minds uncomfortable. She turned to face the assembled officers, her dark eyes reflecting years of being underestimated. "Sir, with respect, the Hercules can stop in under 1,500 feet if you're willing to stress the airframe and trust your pilot. I've done shorter." Major Kim leaned forward, his wedding ring glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. "And if you're wrong, if the approach angle is too steep or the winds shift, we lose a $70 million aircraft and 4 aircrew members to save 12 SEALs who might already be dead." The calculation hung in the air like smoke from a burning building. In military terms, it made no sense. 12 lives against 4, certain loss against possible salvation. But Phoenix had learned long ago that war wasn't fought with calculators. It was won by people willing to attempt the impossible when the possible had already failed. Captain Rodriguez, barely 26 and fresh from flight school, spoke up from the back of the room. "Even if you could land in that space, how would you take off? A loaded C-130 with 16 souls aboard." Phoenix smiled for the first time that morning, an expression that would have worried anyone who truly knew her. Who said anything about taking off conventionally? She moved to the whiteboard, sketching the valley's profile with practice strokes. "Sometimes, Captain, you have to fall upward." The silence that followed contained the weight of revelation and the possibility of disaster. In that moment, the war had found its pivot point, though none of them would understand until much later how drastically everything was about to change. At 6:12 hours, Phoenix walked across the tarmac toward her aircraft, her boots clicking against concrete still cool from the desert night. Behind her, Colonel Thorne's final words echoed. "This is your funeral, Sergeant. Don't make it ours, too." The C-130J Super Hercules squatted on the runway like a gray metallic beast, its 4 turboprop engines already spinning lazy circles in the morning air. Technical Sergeant Riley Martinez, her loadmaster, stood at the cargo ramp reviewing weight and balance calculations with the methodical precision of a man who'd survived 47 combat missions. "Phoenix, I've run these numbers 6 times, Martinez said, not looking up from his clipboard. "We're asking this bird to do things it wasn't designed for." "Every great flight starts with someone asking an aircraft to exceed its design limitations," Phoenix replied, beginning her pre-flight inspection. She ran her hands along the Hercules' aluminum skin, feeling for stress fractures or loose rivets. The aircraft had already logged over 3,000 flight hours in theater, bearing scars from small arms fire and shrapnel. Like its pilot, it was showing its age but refusing to quit. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Park, the flight engineer, emerged from beneath the starboard wing, hydraulic fluid staining her gloves. "All systems green, but I'm concerned about the power settings you'll need for that approach. We'll be redlining everything from engines to landing gear." Phoenix nodded, understanding the unspoken concern. Military aircraft were built tough, but they weren't indestructible. What she was planning would stress every system to its breaking point and possibly beyond. "Park, I need you to monitor every gauge, every pressure reading. The moment something looks wrong, you call it." Flight Lieutenant David Kumar, her co-pilot, climbed aboard looking like a man heading to his own execution. At 28, he was technically senior in rank but junior in experience. This would be his 31st combat mission, but his first time flying with the legendary Phoenix. "Ma'am, I've reviewed the approach plates for Korangal Valley. There aren't any." "That's because no one's been crazy enough to write them," Phoenix replied, settling into the left seat. The cockpit felt like a familiar embrace, every switch and gauge positioned exactly where her hands expected them. She'd flown this particular aircraft, tail number 78614, on 16 previous missions. They knew each other's rhythms, trusted each other's limitations. The radio crackled to life. Iron Horse zero 07 Tower, you're cleared for taxi, runway 09 left. Winds calm, visibility unlimited. Weather at destination. Well, that's your problem. Phoenix keyed her microphone, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. Tower, Iron Horse 07 taxi for 09 left. And Tower, if this goes sideways, tell my story right. The tower controller's response carried a note of reluctant admiration. Copy that, Phoenix. May the angels watch over fools and aviators. As the massive aircraft lurched into motion, Phoenix felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded every impossible mission. Behind them, the desert spread endlessly, but ahead lay mountains that had never been conquered and seals who needed a miracle. Today, she intended to deliver both. The Korangal Valley revealed itself through breaks in the cloud cover like a wound in the earth, its jagged walls rising impossibly steep on both sides. From 8,000 feet above sea level, Phoenix could see the battlefield laid out in miniature. Tiny figures moving among the rocks, muzzle flashes winking like deadly fireflies, and the dark smudges of smoke from burning equipment. Webb's team was trapped in a natural amphitheater barely a mile wide, with Taliban fighters controlling the high ground on three sides. Jesus Christ, Kumar whispered, his face pressed against the side window. It looks like the surface of the moon down there. Phoenix banked the Hercules into a lazy circle, studying the terrain with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a tumor. The improvised landing zone was a flat stretch of valley floor roughly 1,800 feet long and 60 feet wide, dimensions that would challenge even the most experienced bush pilot in a small aircraft. For a C-130 weighing over 70,000 pounds, it represented a physical impossibility that she intended to make routine. Trident 6, this is Iron Horse 07, Phoenix transmitted on the emergency frequency. We're overhead and coming to get you, but I need you to do exactly what I say when I say it. Webb's voice crackled back, strained but professional. Iron Horse, be advised we have enemy armor approximately 2 clicks south and closing. You've got maybe 20 minutes before this LZ becomes untenable. Copy that, Trident. 20 minutes is all I need. Phoenix keyed the intercom to her crew. Gentlemen, we're about to attempt something that violates every principle of aerodynamics and common sense. Martinez, I need you to have those seals aboard and secured in under 3 minutes once we touch down. Phoenix, Park's voice carried the weight of engineering expertise. At our current gross weight, we'll need at least 1,200 feet of roll to stop, and that's if everything goes perfectly. Then everything better go perfectly, Phoenix replied, beginning her descent. The Hercules dropped through the thin mountain air like a controlled avalanche, its engines howling in reverse thrust as she fought to scrub airspeed while maintaining control. The valley walls rushed past the cockpit windows, close enough that she could see individual rocks and stunted trees clinging to impossible slopes. Kumar's hands gripped his armrests until his knuckles turned white. Phoenix, we're coming in way too fast. The approach angle is all wrong. Trust the process, Kumar. I've been having impossible conversations with gravity for 15 years. Phoenix pulled power back to flight idle, feeling the aircraft sink toward the valley floor with deliberate inevitability. Below them, Webb's SEALs had marked their position with orange smoke, creating a target barely visible through the swirling dust and chaos of combat. At 500 feet above ground level, Phoenix committed to the landing, knowing there would be no second chances. The Hercules plummeted toward Earth like a controlled meteor, carrying hope on turboprop wings toward men who had already written their own obituaries. The moment of truth arrived with the grinding screech of aluminum meeting stone. Phoenix held the nose high as the main landing gear slammed into the improvised runway, sending shockwaves through the airframe that rattled every rivet and bolt. The Hercules bounced once, twice, then settled onto the rocky surface with the grace of a controlled crash. Immediately, she deployed full reverse thrust, standing on the brakes until the smell of burning rubber filled the cockpit. 1,500 feet and slowing, Park called out, her voice tight with disbelief. 1,200, 1,000, 500. The aircraft shuddered to a stop with less than 200 feet of runway remaining, its nose pointed toward a wall of granite that rose like a judgment. Before the propellers had stopped turning, Martinez had the cargo ramp lowered and was screaming into his headset. "Go, go, go. We've got 3 minutes max." Web seals materialized from the rocks like ghosts gaining substance, carrying their wounded with the practiced efficiency of men who'd rehearsed this moment in 100 nightmares. Senior Chief, Webb himself limped aboard, his left leg wrapped in field dressings, his eyes carrying the hollow look of a man who'd seen too much death in too short a time. "Phoenix," Webb's voice cut through the controlled chaos of loading wounded men and equipment. "That was either the worst landing I've ever seen or the best." "Both," Phoenix replied, already running through her mental checklist for takeoff. Outside the cockpit windows, she could see Taliban fighters emerging from concealment, their weapons glinting in the afternoon sun. The enemy had realized what was happening and were converging on the trapped aircraft with the determination of predators sensing wounded prey. Kumar's voice cracked with tension. "Phoenix, we've got vehicles approaching from the south. Range approximately 800 meters and closing fast." Martinez status report. 11 souls aboard, one still coming. The loadmaster's voice carried the controlled panic of a man watching his timeline collapse. "The last guy's got a sucking chest wound, needs another 30 seconds." Phoenix felt the familiar calculus of combat. Seconds versus lives, physics versus determination. The Taliban vehicles were close enough now that she could hear the bark of their weapons over the idling engines. Bullets began pinging off the Hercules' armored hull, each impact a reminder of how quickly salvation could transform into catastrophe. "Martinez, we're out of time. Get that ramp up now." "Phoenix, he's not secured." "Then secure him fast, because we're leaving." Phoenix advanced the throttles to takeoff power, feeling the massive aircraft strain against its brakes like a caged animal sensing freedom. The 4 turboprop engines screamed in protest, their combined output generating enough thrust to move mountains, or at least one very heavy transport aircraft loaded with America's finest. Through the side window, Phoenix could see muzzle flashes growing closer, could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47s and the heavier thump of RPGs. Time had run out. Physics demanded satisfaction, and somewhere behind her, 12 men who'd been dead 20 minutes ago were about to find out whether miracles came with guarantees. The Hercules lurched forward like a wounded elephant, every fiber of its aluminum bones groaning under the strain of physics pushed beyond reason. Phoenix held the aircraft on the Rocky Valley floor until the airspeed indicator climbed through 60 knots, then pulled back on the yoke with everything she had. The massive transport aircraft clawed its way into the thin mountain air with the desperation of something fleeing hell itself. "Rotate, rotate, rotate," Kumar chanted, his eyes locked on the granite wall that filled their windscreen like an approaching tombstone. "We're not going to clear it. Phoenix, we're not going to clear the ridge." Phoenix said nothing, her hands steady on the controls as she coaxed every ounce of lift from wings that had never been asked to perform such miracles. The Hercules climbed at an impossible angle, its engines screaming at maximum power, while below them the valley floor dropped away with merciful finality. Tracer rounds followed them upward like angry hornets, some passing close enough to the cockpit that Park instinctively ducked. At the cargo compartment, Martinez wrestled with securing the wounded SEAL, while the aircraft bucked and climbed through turbulence that felt like divine retribution. Blood from multiple wounds painted the aluminum floor in abstract patterns that told stories of men who'd faced death and somehow found themselves airborne instead of buried. Webb struggled forward to the cockpit, using cargo straps for support as the aircraft climbed through 8,000 feet. His weathered face carried an expression Phoenix had seen before, the look of a professional warrior recognizing exceptional competence in an unexpected package. "Ma'am, I don't know what you just did, but my boys and I owe you our lives." "You don't owe me anything, Senior Chief. You just keep doing impossible things, and I'll keep flying you there." Phoenix leveled off at 12,000 feet, finally allowing herself to breathe normally as Afghanistan spread beneath them like a brown and tan carpet of ancient conflicts. Kumar was staring at his instruments as if they might reveal the secret to what had just occurred. "Phoenix, according to the performance charts, what we just did was physically impossible. A fully loaded Hercules can't take off in 1,800 feet at this altitude." "Performance charts are written by engineers who have never been shot at," Phoenix replied. "They assume normal circumstances, and nothing about what we do is normal." She keyed the radio to contact Kandahar Control. "Kandahar approach, Iron Horse 07 airborne from unscheduled LZ, 16 souls aboard, requesting immediate medical priority and direct routing." The controller's voice carried disbelief wrapped in professional courtesy. "Iron Horse 07, confirm you just took off from the Korangal Valley." "That's a firm, Kandahar. Sometimes you have to fall upward to reach heaven." Behind them, the mountains of Afghanistan receded into memory and legend. But the story of what had just occurred was only beginning. In the cargo compartment, 12 SEALs sat in the silence that follows salvation, while in the cockpit, a pilot who'd been written off as past her prime proved that miracles came in turboprop packages flown by people who refused to accept impossible as final. Word traveled through military channels with the speed of electricity and the embellishment of mythology. By the time Iron Horse 07 touched down at Kandahar Airfield, half the base had gathered to witness the aircraft that had supposedly achieved the impossible. Phoenix taxied to the medical ramp where ambulances waited with their red lights painting the afternoon in urgent patterns, but her mind was already shifting to post-flight procedures and the inevitable debriefing that would follow. Colonel Thorne stood at the base of the cargo ramp as Webb's SEALs were transferred to waiting stretchers, his expression cycling through disbelief, admiration, and something approaching awe. As Phoenix shut down the engines and completed her post-flight checklist, she could see him talking with Webb in the intense, abbreviated language of military professionals sharing classified truths. "Phoenix," Park said, reviewing her engineering logs, "I need to report that we exceeded maximum allowable stress limits on the airframe, landing gear, and engines. Technically, this aircraft should be grounded pending a complete structural inspection." "Then I guess it's a good thing we only needed it to work once," Phoenix replied, gathering her helmet bag and flight publications. The familiar weight of another successful mission settled over her shoulders, but something felt different this time. The usual post-flight exhaustion was replaced by an electric awareness that she just participated in something that would be discussed in ready rooms and barrooms for years to come. Martinez appeared in the cockpit doorway, his flight suit stained with blood and hydraulic fluid. "Phoenix, Senior Chief Webb wants to talk to you before the medics haul him away. Says it's important." Phoenix found Webb propped against the side of an ambulance, medics working on his leg wound while he stubbornly refused to lie down on the stretcher. His eyes, surrounded by dust and cordite residue, held the clarity that came from surviving something that should have killed him. "Ma'am, I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer." Webb's voice carried the authority of a man who'd led others through hell and brought them home. 3 years ago in Helmand Province, a C-130 pilot landed in a sandstorm to pull out 14 Marines from my sister unit. The pilot's call sign was Phoenix. That was you, wasn't it? Phoenix nodded, understanding where this conversation was heading. "That was a different mission, Senior Chief, different circumstances." "No, ma'am, it wasn't. It was the same mission, bringing people home when everyone else said it couldn't be done." Webb struggled to his feet despite the medic's protests, extending his hand in a gesture that carried the weight of brotherhood forged in impossible moments. What happened today? What you did? My boys and I won't forget, and we won't let anyone else forget either." As the ambulance pulled away carrying Webb toward the field hospital, Phoenix realized that something fundamental had shifted. The whispers that had followed her for years about being too old, too cautious, too far past her prime would be replaced by something else entirely. The legend of Phoenix wasn't ending. It was just beginning its second chapter. The debriefing room felt like a courtroom where Phoenix was simultaneously defendant and star witness. Colonel Thorne sat across from her at the polished conference table, surrounded by intelligence officers, flight safety investigators, and staff personnel who'd materialized from various corners of the command structure. Each wore the expression of professionals trying to process something that challenged their understanding of what was possible. "Sergeant Nakamura," Thorne began, consulting a file thick with incident reports and witness statements, "I need to understand exactly what happened in that valley. The preliminary reports suggest you accomplished something that our own aviation experts deemed impossible." Phoenix sat with her hands folded, still wearing her sweat-stained flight suit, her hair showing the helmet lines that marked professional aviators like tribal scars. Around the table, junior officers leaned forward, hungry for details they could transform into stories they'd tell for decades. "Sir, I executed a combat extraction under enemy fire using standard C-130 capabilities pushed to their design limits. Nothing more, nothing less." Her voice carried the matter-of-fact tone of someone describing routine maintenance rather than a physics-defying miracle. Major Kim, his engineering background making him particularly skeptical, pulled out a calculator and spread performance charts across the table like evidence in a murder trial. "Sergeant, according to these specifications, a C-130J at maximum gross weight requires a minimum of 3,000 feet for takeoff at sea level. You accomplished the same result in 1,800 feet at 8,000 feet elevation. The math doesn't work." "Major, with respect, mathematics is a tool for understanding reality, not a cage for limiting it." Phoenix reached for the charts, her finger tracing performance curves with the confidence of someone who'd lived beyond their boundaries. "These numbers assume standard procedures, normal conditions, and pilots who color inside the lines. Combat aviation requires different mathematics." Captain Rodriguez, the young pilot who'd questioned the mission's feasibility, spoke up from the back of the room. "Ma'am, could you teach that mathematics? Because what you did today, every pilot in theater needs to understand how it was possible." The question hung in the air like a challenge wrapped in admiration. Phoenix looked around the room, seeing faces that reflected her own journey from skepticism through determination to something approaching reverence. These were good pilots, competent professionals who'd been trained to operate within established parameters. None of them were prepared for what lay beyond those boundaries. "Captain, the mathematics of impossible flights can't be taught in a classroom. It's learned in moments when the only choices are breakthrough or breakdown, when physics becomes personal and failure means people die." Phoenix stood, gathering her flight gear with the same methodical precision she applied to pre-flight inspections. "But if you really want to learn, I suggest you start by questioning every limitation you've accepted as absolute." Colonel Thorne's expression had evolved from skepticism to something approaching understanding. "Sergeant, effective immediately, you're reassigned to Special Operations Command. Seems they have some impossible missions that require your particular mathematics." As Phoenix walked out of the debriefing room, she could hear the murmur of excited conversation behind her. The story was already growing, acquiring details and embellishments that would transform a skilled pilot into legend. But legends, she knew, were just stories people told about ordinary individuals who refused to accept extraordinary circumstances as insurmountable. The transformation began subtly, in the spaces between official reports and unofficial stories. Within 48 hours, every aviator on Kandahar airfield knew about the C-130 that had landed where helicopters feared to go, about the pilot who'd redefined impossible in the span of a single mission. But Phoenix noticed the change most clearly in the morning flight briefings, where her presence no longer generated skeptical glances or whispered doubts. "Phoenix, we've got a situation developing in Helmand Province," Colonel Thorne announced during the 600 briefing, his tone carrying new respect wrapped in military formality. "Special Forces team pinned down by Taliban fighters, extraction point compromised, and every conventional option eliminated. Sound familiar?" Phoenix accepted the mission folder with hands steady from 15 years of impossible requests. Around the briefing room, other pilots watched with the intense attention of students studying a master craftsman. The dynamic had shifted completely. She was no longer the aging veteran struggling for relevance, but the specialist called upon when conventional solutions fell short. Captain Rodriguez approached her after the briefing, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity. "Ma'am, would you mind if I flew as your co-pilot today? I'd like to understand how you assess these impossible situations." Rodriguez, impossible situations don't require special assessment. They require ordinary pilots willing to attempt extraordinary solutions. Phoenix gathered her flight gear, noting how conversations paused as she moved through the ready room. "But if you want to learn, you're welcome aboard." The mission itself proved anticlimactic compared to the Koringal extraction. Phoenix guided the Hercules into another valley that maps claimed was inaccessible, landed on another strip that engineers deemed too short, and collected another group of warriors who'd accepted death until turboprops announced their salvation. Rodriguez observed in silence, taking notes on techniques that couldn't be found in any manual, procedures that existed only in the space between training and necessity. "Phoenix," Rodriguez said as they climbed away from the extraction site, "watching you work. It's like seeing someone speak a language I didn't know existed." Rodriguez, every pilot knows this language. The difference is being willing to speak it when people's lives depend on your vocabulary. Phoenix leveled off at cruising altitude, already thinking about the next impossible request that would inevitably follow. The moment you stop believing in limitations is the moment you discover what's actually possible. Back at Kandahar, the pattern repeated. Successful mission, incredulous debriefing, growing reputation. But Phoenix understood that legends were dangerous things, capable of becoming prisons as confining as any limitation. The key was remembering that every impossible flight began with someone willing to attempt what others wouldn't consider. That evening, she found Webb waiting by her aircraft, his leg wound healed enough to support his weight but still requiring a walking stick. His presence suggested unfinished business, the kind of conversation that couldn't happen in official channels. "Ma'am, I need to tell you something that didn't make it into my after-action report." Phoenix paused in her post-flight inspection, understanding that some truths were too important for paperwork. "I'm listening, Senior Chief." 3 months later, the impossible had become routine. Phoenix's call sign appeared on mission rosters with increasing frequency, always attached to extractions deemed too dangerous for conventional aircraft. The Koringal Valley mission had transformed from singular achievement into proof of concept, demonstrating that the boundaries of aviation existed primarily in the minds of those who'd never tested them. The change was most apparent in the ready room, where Phoenix's presence now commanded the unconscious respect accorded to specialists who'd proven their competence in circumstances where failure meant death. Younger pilots sought her guidance with the hunger of students recognizing a master, while senior officers deferred to her judgment on matters that would have once been decided without consulting her opinion. "Phoenix, we've got a development," Colonel Thorne announced during a classified briefing attended by senior staff and special operations commanders. "Intelligence has located a high-value target in the Hindu Kush Mountains, but the extraction point is, well, let's call it challenging." Phoenix accepted the mission packet with the same calm professionalism she'd shown 3 months earlier, but the weight of reputation now accompanied every impossible request. Around the table, eyes watched her with expectations that had evolved from skepticism through hope into absolute confidence. She'd become the solution to problems that had no solutions, the pilot called upon when conventional wisdom acknowledged defeat. "Sir, what's the timeline?" Phoenix asked, reviewing topographical maps that showed terrain resembling the surface of an alien planet. 18 hours. The target is moving and we have a narrow window. Thorne's expression carried the weight of classified urgency. "Phoenix, I won't lie to you. This one makes the core angle look like a training exercise. The approach requires threading between peaks at altitudes that push the Hercules beyond its service ceiling. If you can't do it, no one can." Phoenix studied the mission parameters with growing understanding. This wasn't just another extraction. It was a test of whether the impossible could become repeatable, whether one miraculous flight could evolve into a new tactical capability. The military was asking her to prove that miracles came with warranties. "Colonel, I'll need Kumar as co-pilot and Martinez as loadmaster. They understand the language we'll be speaking up there." Phoenix folded the maps with deliberate precision. "And sir, this isn't about whether I can do it. It's about whether we're ready to accept that impossible is just another word for difficult." That evening, Phoenix sat in the empty ready room, studying satellite imagery and weather reports. The mission would require everything she'd learned about pushing aircraft beyond their design limitations, combined with tactical skills she'd refined through dozens of impossible extractions. But something felt different about this particular request, a sense that she was approaching a threshold beyond which lay either legend or catastrophe. Kumar found her there at 2200 hours, reviewing approach plates for the 100th time. "Phoenix, I've been thinking about tomorrow's mission. The variables are significant." "Kumar, every mission has variables. The trick is distinguishing between the ones that matter and the ones that just look dangerous." Phoenix gathered her materials, preparing for what might be her final impossible conversation with gravity. "Tomorrow, we find out whether miracles are reproducible or if we've just been lucky." The morning of the mission dawned clear and cold, with winds aloft that promised either perfect flying conditions or catastrophic turbulence, depending on altitude and timing. Phoenix completed her pre-flight inspection with the methodical thoroughness of someone who understood that attention to detail meant the difference between legend and tragedy. Every rivet, every control surface, every system received the scrutiny of a pilot who'd learned to trust her aircraft completely, while never taking its capabilities for granted. The target location lay deep in the Hindu Kush, accessible only through a mountain pass that existed more in satellite imagery than physical reality. Intelligence reports described a narrow valley surrounded by peaks reaching above 20,000 feet, with weather patterns that could shift from clear to catastrophic in minutes. The extraction point itself measured less than 1,200 feet in usable length, situated on a plateau that dropped into nothingness on three sides. "Iron Horse 07, you're cleared for departure," the tower controller announced, his voice carrying the mixture of professionalism and concern that accompanied Phoenix's missions. "Weather at destination is currently marginal VFR but forecast to deteriorate. Be advised, we're showing high-altitude winds gusting to 60 knots. Phoenix acknowledged the clearance while mentally converting the weather report into tactical considerations. 60-knot winds at altitude meant turbulence that could tear an aircraft apart, but they also provided the additional airspeed that might make an impossible landing merely improbable. Kumar occupied the right seat with the confidence of a pilot who'd learned to trust Phoenix's unconventional mathematics, while Martinez ran final equipment checks in the cargo compartment. Flight Engineer Park monitored engine parameters with the focused intensity of someone who understood that every system would be stressed beyond normal limits. "Phoenix," Park's voice carried technical curiosity wrapped in professional concern, I've been analyzing the performance requirements for today's mission. We'll be operating at 97% of maximum gross weight at an altitude that reduces engine performance by 30%. The margins for error are optimistic. Park, margins for error are luxuries we can't afford when people are counting on us to achieve the impossible. Phoenix guided the Hercules through its climb to cruising altitude, feeling the aircraft respond with the familiar reliability of a machine built to exceed expectations. Today we find out whether physics is absolute or negotiable. As they approached the target area, the Hindu Kush Mountains revealed themselves through breaks in the cloud cover like teeth in a primordial jaw. The terrain defied rational explanation. Vertical walls of granite and ice rising from valleys so narrow they seemed carved by geological anger. Phoenix studied the approaching geography with the analytical detachment of a surgeon planning an operation that had never been attempted. "Jesus Christ," Kumar whispered, his face pressed against the side window. "It looks like the end of the world down there." Phoenix banked into a reconnaissance pattern, studying their destination with eyes that had learned to see possibilities where others saw only obstacles. The target valley lay ahead, wrapped in morning shadows and the kind of silence that preceded either triumph or disaster. The approach to the target required threading the Hercules between mountain peaks, with clearances measured in yards rather than miles. Phoenix descended through thin air that provided barely enough lift to maintain control, while wind shear battered the aircraft like an angry god testing her determination. Kumar gripped his controls with white knuckles, calling out altitude and airspeed readings that painted a picture of controlled disaster. 500 feet above terrain, airspeed 140 knots and decreasing, Kumar announced, his voice tight with concentration. "Phoenix, we're below minimum safe altitude for this terrain." "Kumar, safe altitude is wherever we don't hit anything." Phoenix held the Hercules in a descent that violated every principle of mountain flying, trusting instruments and instinct to guide them through geography that maps couldn't adequately describe. Sometimes safety means accepting calculated risks that look insane to everyone else. The target valley materialized beneath them like a secret, revealed reluctantly. The landing zone consisted of a rocky plateau barely wide enough for the Hercules' wingspan, surrounded by drops that disappeared into morning shadows.